Chapter 20. The champion prepares. A messenger was dispatched to the enemy camp. He bore a letter accepting Gridall's challenge. The champion was Cornwall would meet the Perthyn in the valley between the two camps at noon the following day. Word quickly spread among the Cornwalders that a champion had presented himself, but no one seemed to know who he was. The circle of tents in the command yard had been sealed off completely. No one had come into the yard or gone out since the news of the champion first began to spread. There was much speculation regarding the hero's identity. None of the obvious candidates among Cornwall's mightiest warriors had volunteered. That much was well known. The prevailing belief was that the king and his adviser had sent away for a mercenary, a foreign fighter working strictly for pay, not for loyalty to a king or cause. But where would the king find a man who would face certain death for mere money? For all the interest it generated, however, news of the champion created little hope of deliverance among the Cornwalders. In the Cornwalder imagination, Gridall was more than a man, and as enormous as he was, in fact, in their eyes he loomed 10 times larger. Day and night, the Cornwalders meditated on the Perthyn champion, and in their minds he had become like a god, invulnerable to any human assault. Aidan, meanwhile, had been given his own little tent within the command yard. There he was supposed to rest in preparation for the next day's battle. But he had little opportunity for rest, for generals and advisers, Darrow's entire inner circle, it seemed, came by in a steady stream to offer strategies and advice for the battle. None of these men had even entertained the thought of facing Gridall themselves, but they all had their opinion about how best to defeat him, and their opinions all seemed to disagree with one another. The secret is to hit him high. That's the one thing a big man can't defend against. The only way to beat a man this big is to hit him low, of course. You've got to cut him down to your own size. Keep moving. Never stand still, even for a moment. Make sure you stand your ground. You can't really strike if you're on the run. You'll want to use a big two-handed sword, the biggest you can lift. It takes a big weapon to hurt an opponent this big. You'll need a small sword, obviously something you can jab and move with. Your only hope is to find a seam in Gridall's armor. Aidan's head was swimming with all this contradictory advice. When King Darrow's armor-bearer arrived to fetch him to the royal armory, Aidan left his tent with the armor-bearer, leaving behind two noblemen arguing over the relative merits of chain mail and plate mail. The large tent that served as a royal armory stood beside the council tent. Its roof flaps were open to the afternoon sun, which gleamed on the burnished steel of the arms and armor within. Just inside the entrance to the armory, a dozen suits of armor, 6 on either side, stood still and straight, as if guarding the place. Behind them were forests of spears and lances propped in wooden racks, row upon row, their polished points flashing in the sun. The sides of the armory tent were hung with shields, each embossed with the golden boar on a field of royal blue, decorated with brass rivets and bands. There were tall, curved shields that a soldier could crouch behind in case of an arrow volley, as well as the small, round bucklers more suitable for the close work of foot soldiers, and the long oval shields used by cavalrymen. Bundles of blue-feathered arrows were stacked like firewood, besides dozens of smooth and narrow longbows. Aidan had never seen such a complete and varied collection of arms. Of the swords arranged along a table, no two were alike. Heavy two-handed swords were next to long, slender sabers. Short, thick thrusting swords were displayed alongside light but deadly rapiers. Aidan was admiring the broad curve of a scimitar when King Darrow entered the tent behind him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the scimitar. "Belonged to a pirate king who we captured in a sea battle near Middlemarch." "Your Majesty," said Aidan, bowing to the king. He wasn't sure what else to say. He was caught off guard by the king's casual tone. "You're doing a great service to your king and country," continued the king. "I am grateful to you. And so is all of Cornwall." Aidan bowed again to his king, not sure what to say. "You're welcome. Don't mention it." "Here you have it," Darrow went on. "My entire armory. Arm yourself for tomorrow's battle. You are welcome to anything in here." A sort of excitement electrified Aidan. The place was full of the most fabulous weapons. How would he ever choose? The king's armor-bearer approached, staggering under a pile of steel armor. "You've met Thimble already," said the king. "He has gathered up some armor for you to try on." Thimble went to work on Aidan. First he strapped a pair of shin guards around his legs. This took some creativity on Thimble's part, because the shin guards were made to fit snugly around calves that were twice the size of Aidan's. Then he buckled on a pair of thigh plates. Aidan's legs were so short, however, that the thigh plates and shin guards overlapped. He couldn't quite straighten his legs and had to walk in a slight squat. By the time Thimble had strapped the breastplate and backplate on Aidan, the suit of armor was starting to get quite heavy. Aidan looked like a turtle who had borrowed a shell from a much larger turtle, and he was about as mobile as a turtle, too. Thimble fitted the throat guard around Aidan's neck, attached arm plates to his shoulders and upper arms, and pulled heavy steel gloves over his hands. Aidan could barely move at all. When Thimble placed the helmet on Aidan's head and flipped the visor down, Aidan felt like a mule wearing a heavy set of blinders. He could see what was directly in front of his face, but nothing else. "How do you see out of this thing?" he asked. His voice echoed around him, as if his head were in a bucket, which, in a way, it was. "How do you breathe?" he asked, with the slightest hint of panic in his voice. He was starting to feel closed in. "Outstanding," said the king, knocking on Aidan's backplate. It made a hollow metallic echo. "Now you look like a true hero of Cornwall." Aidan felt ridiculous, not heroic. "Now that your armor is taken care of," continued the king, "let's see about your armaments. Come over here. Let me show you some things." Nearly immobilized by his heavy, awkward armor, Aidan creaked and shuffled as best he could toward the sound of the king's voice. With each tiny step he squeaked and clanged like a door on old hinges. "Against a man in iron armor, blunt force always helps," said the king. "This case is where I keep my melee weapons: maces, clubs, war hammers, flails, battle axes. Pick something out. See how it feels to you." The visor made it impossible for Aidan to see what he was doing, but he reached a steel gloved hand into the weapon box and grabbed the first thing he put his hand on, a thick iron chain. Pulling it out, he found a handle at one end of the chain, and at the other end a heavy iron ball, bigger than a grapefruit, with sharp spikes sticking out in every direction. "A flail," observed the king. "Very good choice." Aidan hesitated. He had never seen a flail before and wasn't sure how it worked. "Just grab the handle," offered the king, placing the handle in Aidan's right hand, "and whip it around so that the ball flies in a circle around your head. Careful now, don't let it hit you. Hit your opponent with that very heavy ball, and he'll know he's been hit." The king took several steps back, giving Aidan plenty of room to swing. "Give it a try. See how it works." Cautiously at first, Aidan began to swing the flail. Lifting his arm was difficult, but he soon got a feel for the motion, and the spiky, menacing ball was whirring around his head like a massive sling stone. Just as he began to get comfortable with his new weapon, however, the handle slipped out of his gloved hand. The flail ball rocketed through the air just over the king's head and tore through the side of the tent. A dozen or more blue or gold shields came crashing to the ground with a huge clamor, knocking over the spears that stood in ranks by that side of the tent. 100 spears and javelins rolled across the floor of the armory tent. Aidan, meanwhile, had lost his balance, overweighted by his top-heavy armor. He blindly staggered forward, then backward, scattering a stack of poleaxes, then overturning the table of swords with tremendous crash before he himself clattered to the ground. Within seconds, 10 members of Darrow's royal bodyguard had stormed the armory tent, convinced by the sound of things that a full-blown melee had broken out. They laughed uproariously to see that the whole thing was caused by a 12-year-old boy playing dress-up. A boy who now lay on his back like a beetle, unable to help himself. Aidan's face burned with humiliation. Two of the guards helped him to his feet, and he immediately pulled the helmet from his head and began unstrapping the other pieces of armor. "Thank you, your majesty, for your kind offer," he said, still breathing heavily. "But I think it will be best if I face the person with the weapon I know best, in clothes that don't restrict my freedom to move." "What weapon?" asked the king, curious. "A sling. I may be young, but I have years of experience protecting my flock with nothing more than a sling and a staff. I've put wolves and bears to flight. I killed a panther with a single sling stone." "Frightening a wolf and killing a giant are two very different things," began the king with a rising voice. "Killing a panther with a sling is an impressive feat, but there is such a thing as a lucky shot. I wouldn't count on doing it again." "Your majesty," answered Aidan, still unstrapping, "you have been most generous to me, and I do not wish to seem ungrateful. But the truth is, nothing short of a miracle of the one God could deliver us from the hands of the Perthans tomorrow. There is no armor in this armory, and no weapon, that make it possible for a 12-year-old boy to defeat Grydal. Only by a miracle can I survive tomorrow's battle, with or without this armor, with or without these weapons. If I am defeated tomorrow, I want to die as I have lived, a shepherd boy, with the sun on my forehead and the breeze in my hair. But if I overcome, everyone must know that the one God, and not Aidan Errolson, is the champion of Cornwall. Neither arms nor armor can deliver Cornwall, only the arm of the one God." The king's eyes grew wet with tears as he listened to the shepherd boy. He remembered a time when he, too, lived to serve the true champion of Cornwall. "Your wish is granted," said the king softly. "Live or die the way you see fit." He put his hand on Aidan's head, the way Aidan's father had done so often. They walked silently from the armory, lost in a memory of Cornwall of old. Aidan spent the rest of the afternoon in solitude. His string of visitors had played out. Sitting alone in his tent, he was assailed by doubts and fears. Whatever made him think he could defeat a giant with a sling? Why was he throwing his life away for Cornwall? What was Cornwall, anyway? The Cornwalders outside his tent were a bunch of cowards and self-servers who wouldn't know what to do with themselves, even if he did manage somehow to deliver them. Aidan began to consider running away. But where could he run? He couldn't go home, for running away would bring shame to his father and his brothers, and he couldn't possibly face them. Perhaps he could join the Feechee band in the swamp alongside Bayberry Creek. The Feechees would be glad to have him, wouldn't they? Aidan was so deep in his thought that he didn't notice that two goats nuzzling through the flap into his tent. "Ma," said the nanny, bringing Aidan back to the present. He pulled open his tent flap, and there stood the old prophet, with his piercing green eyes and his big white salad of hair. Aidan gave Bayard an uncertain smile and motioned him into the tent. The goat sniffed around the tent looking for something to eat, while Aidan and Bayard looked at one another, neither saying a word. Bayard saw things other people couldn't see. Did he know the cowardly thoughts that Aidan had just been entertaining? At last, Aidan spoke, unable to stand the silence any longer. Bayard, am I being a fool? Bayard beamed a kindly smile on the boy. Son of Errol, there are many kinds of fool. Do not ask, am I being a fool? Ask, am I being the right sort of fool? Aidan shook his head. The old man could never give a straight answer. How did I get into this mess? Asked Aidan. I just came to deliver some bread and cheese to my brothers. I know you cannot see it now, answered Bayard. Not yet. But this mess is the whole reason you are here. You only thought you were here to deliver bread and cheese. How about you, Bayard? Why are you here? You might say I've come out of retirement. Never has a king needed a truth speaker at his side more than Darrow needs one now. Aidan sniffed. A lot of good it's done him. A truth speaker can only do so much, young Errolson. Darrow has heard the truth. That is why I am here. Tomorrow he will see the truth. That is why you are here. Bayard snapped his fingers, and his goats hopped over to stand beside him. Rydal is a monster. You are right to fear him. Only love goodness more than you fear evil. Bayard chuckled to himself and shook his head. He thought he was here to deliver bread and cheese, he told the billy goat. Then he spoke to Aidan. Live the life that unfolds before you. The one God is with you. He turned toward the door. I have some people to see. I won't be here for tomorrow's battle. He nudged his goats out into the evening. Then, just before ducking through the flap, he turned back to Aidan. Have you decided yet? Aidan looked at the old man confused. Decided what? Whether I'm a prophet or madman.